It's Wednesday at 5 p.m. Eastern, so you know what that means. It's time for another episode of Hashtag Event Icons, presented by Endless Events, the show where you get to ask the icons of the events industry anything. So, you might be wondering, how do you get to ask questions? All you have to do is use the question panel on the right of GoToWebinar to submit your questions. Or you can hop on Twitter to submit your questions with the hashtag EventIcons. We'll be answering your questions live during the entire show. Before we get started, the more people we have watching, the better conversation we can have. So please help share hashtag EventIcons on Twitter and Facebook. Just tell your friends to watch at www.event-icons.com. Now, without any further delay, this is Hashtag Event Icons with your hosts, Will Curran of Endless Events, Laura Lopez of Social Tables, and Brant Kruger of Event Technology Consulting.
All right. I love those intros. I just love the fact that we've got intro music that is like funky and groovy and just gets me going every time. Welcome everybody to Event Icons. I'm Brant Kruger hosting today. Will and Laura are on assignment, as they say, and but we have a great, fantastic show for you today. We're being joined to discuss the topic of getting the most from your presenters today. We're talking with Melyssa Wolf, who is the Senior Manager at Social Energy Trade Shows. Hi, Melyssa.
Solar energy. Yes.
What did I say?
It's social, but I'm social.
Solar is very social.
Yeah.
I apologize for that. Solar Trade Shows. And Thom Singer, who is a professional speaker and moderator and MC person, right?
That's me.
That's right. Okay. All right. Well, those are the titles, but let's find out a little bit more about you guys individually. Melyssa, tell us a little bit about the work that you do for the solar energy trade shows.
I am lucky. I get to wear a lot of different hats where I work. We put on Solar Power International, which is the largest solar event in the nation, attracting about 18,000 people and 650 exhibitors. And I get to work on all of our keynotes, so general sessions, developing some of our concurrent sessions, and then our special programming and events. We also put on 7 to 8 regional events throughout the nation, and I work on the emerging markets, figuring out where solar is big and where we should take an event, and then I head up that event. I launch it, I work on all the programmatic and logistical pieces, and then I also oversee sales, marketing, and partnerships. So that's me in a nutshell, where I work.
That is a lot of hats. Wow.
It
Very
is.
nice. Very nice. And Thom, tell us a little bit more about what you do.
So I am a professional speaker and master of ceremonies, and I created a program about 10 years ago called the Conference Catalyst. So what I do is I'm either the opening speaker at a conference, or I can take that content and break it up into like 5-minute chunks over 2 or 3 days as the master of ceremonies. But the idea is, how do we get people off their phones and talking to each other without saying, put your phones away? And so I've created a way to make conferences better, because people go to events really for connecting with other people. You don't have to go to live events anymore to get information, because all the information in the world is just about online. So we need to do that, but people show up at these events and they sit with their coworkers, or they're always on their phone. So my job is to make the event better.
It does feel like for quite a few years there we were trying to get people to get their phones out and work on and get engaged, and now it does seem like we're starting to get a little bit of a backlash where we're trying to get people to put them away.
Well, I don't know that we want them to put them away. We just want to make sure that they're using them for the right reasons at the right time. I actually lost a deal because the board decided that they had spent $30,000 on an app, and that if I did my job right, people would talk to each other rather than playing the game on the app. First of all, that's a ridiculous.
Forbid.
Second of all, I could have made the app better, because I would have taught them how to use the app correctly.
Yeah.
Well, we've got a couple of questions at the beginning that we always like to ask folks, just to kind of get to know everybody. As you know, if you've watched Event Icons, we like to keep it casual here and kind of just keep it a little bit more conversational. So, Thom, we'll start with you. What got you into this crazy little industry of ours?
So I was the director of marketing for Texas, for Austin and Dallas, for a very large law firm, one of the AmLaw 100 firms, and they had been my client. They hired me on as their marketing and business development director. The managing partner told me, and this is 15 years ago, he said, you're going to create a class for the lawyers on how to get better engaged in the community, how to network, how to treat people, because you're good at it, and the lawyers suck at it. And so I created this course, and I was really creative. It was called Networking 101 for Lawyers. I've gotten better with titles since then, but I thought I was going to get fired. I thought the lawyers were going to hate this. And at the end, one of the partners raised his hand and said, I have a complaint. And I thought, really, in front of the whole firm? And his complaint was there was too much information. It should have been broken up into a couple of classes. They started sending me all over the country doing this engagement class. And people kept saying, wow, this is really good. Why don't you just go become a speaker? And I literally thought, that's a thing? I mean, I'm not famous. I'm not a former leader of the free world or a baseball player or something. What do you mean go be a speaker? And it turned out there was a whole industry, a whole piece of the events business for people like me. And it took me a few years to get into it, but I've never looked back.
Very nice. And Melyssa, how about you?
Random happenstance, came into the association world. After I graduated college, I moved across the country from Washington State to Washington, D.C. to intern at a public affairs office, and ended up getting into events, and then fell into an association, which has taken me pretty far. I've made great connections, and from a wind energy association to solar. So it's an industry I didn't know existed until I moved to a big city.
That's one of the things that continues to fascinate me about our industry is how many different niches there are. I mean, that there's literally an association for everything. If it exists as a job or a profession or a hobby, there's a conference for it. There's a trade show, and that's kind of what makes it so much fun for me personally. Is just it's going to be something different every day. So then the follow-up to that is, of course, if you weren't in the events industry, what would you be doing instead, Melyssa?
I have some awesome hobbies, and one of my hobbies is I teach group exercise classes. And so I don't know if I would take that as a career, but potentially maybe that's what I would do if I wasn't doing events. But I kind of love my job, and I love also teaching group fitness. So I kind of meld the two worlds and get to do both things. But I also love politics, so I think it would be fun someday to work on a campaign of some sort. But it's a great city to live in for that in D.C. So there's lots of connections to be made. But yeah.
It's always a tough one because the vast majority of people in the industry do like what they do. So it makes it a tough question. Tom, how about you?
Yeah.
So, I mean, as a kid, I wanted to be an actor, and I never pursued it. And that's why being a professional speaker has been so great, because I get to sort of be on stage and have an impact and at the same time be entertaining. So, I don't know, maybe if I had to do all over again, I would have pursued it. But here's the worst part. I grew up in Los Angeles, and I never went for it. And, you know, I was 40-plus years old before I became a speaker. So there was a big swath of years where I should have done something and didn't. So that's another reason I'm so dedicated to it, because I wasted a lot of time before I got into something I really liked.
That's always a tough one, yeah, when you kind of look back and go, well, I coulda, shoulda, woulda, but didn't. That's always a tough one. All right, well, let's get into it. Enough of the fluffy stuff, right? Let's get into the hardcore eventing. Melyssa, I'd like to kind of start with you. Let's start at the beginning of the process. You know, what would you say is kind of the hardest part about sourcing your speakers? So, you know, before we even get to the kind of getting the most out of them, what's the hardest part about finding them in the first place?
So I look at it in two different ways. I look at it in hiring keynotes, and then also really maximizing on the industry professionals that you have and how to find the right ones. So I source it through people that we know in the industry. So typically in an association, you put out a call for abstracts. So we do that for only one of our shows, and the rest of them we source locally, which I know sounds kind of like a grocery store, but we do. We look in the different regions and say, hey, where are some of the people we know, the companies that we know that are great and really engaged in our industry, and let's see what speakers we can find from those companies or from those other organizations or nonprofits, and bring them together to form and base our program off of. So that's where I start when I'm looking for industry professional speakers. And then with keynotes, we were talking about this before the podcast. To me, it's difficult working with speakers bureaus. I feel like I have to work with several of them at once to really find what I'm looking for, and also kind of balancing what the CEOs of our companies want as well on the stage. But I think Tom had some great solutions to that too. I think he'll answer in a couple of seconds. But that's the base of what I do when I'm trying to source speakers.
sneak peek, and I think I know what you're referring to, but we're probably going to hold that off towards the end when we get into the tips section of the thing. But I agree, there's some interesting ideas. So Thom, I'll try and take it from a different angle on your side. As a speaker, what would you say is probably the most difficult parts about getting hired, about getting your name out there? Obviously, it's a pretty big market. So what makes you kind of rise above the rest?
15 years ago when I started looking at this, and really 10 years ago when I started, there wasn't as many people who called themselves speakers. Now, if you do a search on LinkedIn, everybody calls themselves a conference speaker. And so the first thing is that a speaker isn't a commodity item. So like she was talking about, keynote speakers and then industry speakers, there's so many different categories that sort of fall in, because even within keynoters, you have, your celebrity speeches. I mean, it was just announced yesterday that Barack Obama is going to be paid $400,000 for an hour speech to one of the investment banks. I don't get paid anywhere near that amount, but in all fairness, I was not the leader of the free world for 8 years, so there's a little bit of a difference. But you have your uber celebrity, sort of former government people, Major League Baseball players, people who founded massive companies. Then you have sort of what I call pseudo-famous people who have been sort of ancillary involved with something. They're a leader. Maybe they had a TEDx talk that went pseudo-viral. And then you have sort of these unknown speakers, where I sort of probably fall. And there's a lot of really good people out there, but it's the hardest thing is getting in front of people for the right thing. Because if somebody has a $400,000 budget, it's not going to come down to Barack Obama or Thom Singer. I mean, it's just that if you've got that budget, that's not where it's going to go. Once in my career have I been up where the committee narrowed it down to 2 speakers, and they had a budget like 4 times my fee at the time. And it came down to me and Biz Stone, one of the founders of Twitter. And I literally asked the meeting planner, how did we get to me and one of the founders of Twitter? And what it was is they had a budget for a celebrity. They liked the idea of him. He had just released a book. But the CEO of their company had seen me speak and was really pushing for me. And the committee was torn between, we have a bigger budget than this guy, and the CEO wants this guy, but what do we do? And in the end, they went with the celebrity, which I wasn't surprised nor shocked or upset. So the hardest thing is finding out what are you looking for, really narrowing down from the association side or the company side, what are you trying to accomplish with the speakers who you're bringing in, both paid speakers and industry speakers. So that's the hardest thing for me. Most of my business, I counted it up recently, I think 90+% is from word of mouth. People have sat in an audience and seen me and said, we're going to bring him into our association. Or once removed, one of their friends has said, oh, you should talk to him, put him on your short list. So if you're not famous, it's hard to get on the lists just because there's so many ways to source speakers. So that's the hardest part for me, is just getting people to know I exist. If they talk to me, I have a pretty good track record if they'll get on the phone with me.
And I'll comment to that if you don't mind.
Sure.
So from my standpoint, I'm trying to find a speaker right now for an event in September, and working with speakers bureaus, and I've been given the charge to find a big name to talk about innovation and disruption. And to me, I would rather have somebody who's an expert and an incredible speaker on stage than someone that has some name recognition. But I think Tom's right. It's all about figuring out and aligning the goals between that committee and what you can offer. And that's the challenge, I think, that I find.
Well, and there have been surveys. It used to be you wanted a celebrity because it helped drive butts into the seats. But some of the recent surveys that have been done by different groups in the meetings industry have shown that it doesn't really drive attendance as much as it used to.
Yeah.
So the big name thing, if it's going to produce a 50% more attendance rate, great. But if it's not, A, you can save some money, and B, lots of times you're going to get a better speaker when you go with somebody who is, put a lot of time into learning the business. I read one time that you have to give 300 professional level speeches before you're ever going to be great. And when I was starting off, I thought, I'll never get to 300. Well, now I'm about to top 600, and I will tell you, I can handle a lot more on stage. Things could go wrong. They can change the time. They can tell me you don't have an hour, you now have 40 minutes. I can handle that, where when I had done 40 speeches, 20 speeches, I couldn't have. So there is a value in someone who has dedicated themselves to the art and the business of speaking. And that's why sometimes, just a big name itself doesn't necessarily fill what you need to accomplish. And by the way, Melyssa, I have an innovation expert who is a great speaker.
Awesome.
Offline. Let me give you a recommendation.
We're making deals. We're making deals.
I got someone
Finding
you away.
I love it. Thank you.
Very nice.
And
Very nice.
And that's one of the things is people who are really dedicated to being speakers. We're a weird bunch. We have friends. We build relationships with other speakers, and we watch closely. We probably vet better than anybody in the world because we'll sit there and watch them and go, really? They're getting paid? Or, oh my gosh, I don't even belong in this business if that woman is on the stage. She's so great.
Well, so I want to move on to kind of my next question. You guys both touched on it, but I want to make sure that I understood properly. So what I was going to be kind of going next is kind of where the first place for people that are just getting started, the first place that they should start to look for speakers. And you both kind of indicated word of mouth was kind of the number one thing. I mean, is that accurate? Or that word of mouth was kind of number one, and then heading to the speaker bureaus and things like that is kind of the secondary?
I would say yes. Word of mouth, we have committees and we have people all over the country that know the speakers and can recommend them. And of course, I would rather take someone by word of mouth than through an abstract system that I'm not really sure who this person is.
Well, and word of mouth is good because if somebody has actually sat in the audience and was moved by them, then you know that they have sort of those skills. But it also depends who is that word of mouth coming from. So you want to make sure that those recommendations are coming from people who have seen a lot of speakers, because I'm always amazed, sometimes people will be like, oh, that was great. A friend of mine who's not in the business, we were watching a speaker together, and on the way out, we looked at each other, and I said, that was all right. And she said, oh my God, that was amazing. And so we sat down and had a cup of coffee, and she thought it was amazing solely because the person was really smart and sort of well-known and felt honored to be in the same room. And my take was they said and ah a lot. They looked at their shoes. They never moved from like a 2-foot square. So we viewed it very differently. So I think word of mouth is important, but you have to know who is it who's telling you.
And back to your, the point that you made in the previous answer, Tom, that having that professional ability to kind of go with the flow, change things on the fly. I mean, some of the biggest meltdowns I've seen on the production side have been from inexperienced speakers. That something changes at the last minute, or something goes wrong with their PowerPoint, or something along those lines, and then it's just explosion time, stomping off, that's it, I'm out of here kind of stuff, as opposed to someone that can just kind of laugh it off and wing with it. So I've definitely seen that in my experience as well, which kind of makes me wonder. I mean, we've all kind of got these types of stories where speakers kind of go wrong, like you said, like you were kind of meh on yours, but has there been kind of a big mishap for either one of you regarding a presenter? What happened? How did you fix it? What can we do to prevent those kinds of things? Melyssa, why don't we start with you?
Sure. So the first thing I can think of, it wasn't necessarily how they were speaking, but it was they were late to my general session. And I was a little frazzled I had to delay the session by a few minutes and call my team and say, hey, do you know where this CEO is? He was flying in from another country, and it was hard to get a hold of him. And all the other panelists are backstage like getting ready, and they're like, where's so-and-so? So I was scrambling to figure out where he was, and turns out he sauntered in a minute after the session and was like, oh, hey, I'm here. I'm like, you're a minute late. I had to delay my session. So it's hard when you're not working with, I think, professional speakers too, because they don't have the same expectations necessarily, or the same timelines or sense of urgency. So when I have to do CEO panels, I definitely have set up different checkpoints and people on my staff to help me greet the speakers, make sure that they escort them, so that there's none of this last-minute scramble to get somebody on the stage.
So your advice out of that would be kind of just to make sure, if it's someone who, again, is not very, not doing it on a regular basis, you've got some extra checks involved, and like, okay,
right.
This person's going to meet you at the airport. This person's going to make sure that you walk in the room at this time.
Right.
Okay.
This person's going to make sure you checked into your hotel, so we know that you're actually in the city that you're in. And just, little checks like that, and the communication piece, making sure that, you have their assistant's cell phone on hand at all times. Things like that.
Thom, any good stories on speaker misfortune?
Yeah, you know, so two really come to mind. One was I do a thing called the pre-note, which is if they have sort of a celebrity speaker, but they want this conference catalyst message, I can do it in 20 minutes in front of their celebrity keynote. And so we were getting mic'd up, and I showed up first because I showed up an hour in advance, and the other speaker showed up about 15 minutes before we went on. Well, it wasn't in a hotel. It was something that AV people had to like bring the AV equipment in. It was in more of just a hall. And the little microphones that they clip onto you, you know, they have the little fuzzy ball thing on them to stop the wind. One of the mics didn't have that, and the mic just had like a little stick where that should have been. And I had gotten mic'd up, and he just put the one that was they both worked, but the one that was properly looking on me. And the other speaker showed up and said, "This is not acceptable." And the guy's like, "Well, it's all I got." And he goes, "It still works. He goes, but look at it. It's like a little stick. People will think it looks bizarre." Well, it was a room of 300 people. They weren't using an iMac. No one was going to see the microphone there. And he started to berate the sound guy for being unprofessional and this isn't appropriate. And so I sort of chimed in and said, "Well, we can switch mics because I'm only doing 20 minutes and he was doing like an hour and 15. And he looked at me and goes, "That would be more appropriate." And I thought, please God, if I'm ever the celebrity, if I ever build my career to that level, don't ever let me be that way. So that's the first thing, is just there's some prima donnas out there, and I'm sure I'm guilty of it. You can talk to some of the people I've worked with, and I might have, you know, been slightly that way, but probably never like that, I hope. But the other piece of it is that I was emceeing an event, and they had a CEO of one of their client companies, and he had an hour for his keynote. So I introduce him and I shake his hand and he goes down and gives his speech. And I have an hour. I'm right there backstage in the green room, but I'm checking Facebook, I'm doing stuff, I'm returning emails, and all of a sudden he says, "Thank you very much." And it has been 14 minutes and the next speaker isn't mic'd up yet. And as he walks off the stage, I stop him and I said, "Will you come back and we can do Q&A?" Because we had to fill, maybe 45 minutes till they could get the next speaker. And he looked at me and goes, "I don't do Q&A," and he walked off. And I looked at the meeting planner, and I just said, "I'll wing it." And I went outside, and I started pulling people up from the audience, and she got the other speaker. I only had to fill about 10 minutes. And we told the other guy, "Go as long as you want." He ended early, and we went to break, and it was all fine. But, you know, you can't have a speaker that runs long, but the one thing people don't think about is you can't have a speaker that runs short.
Yeah. I might have needed you, Thom. In 2015, we had Vice President Joe Biden speak and give keynote remarks, and he was late, and so we had to fill 30 minutes of time before he got there and keep all the people in the seats. I think we had about 3,000 people there, so we could have used your expertise there.
Well, and that's the reason I think, not me, but that's the reason I think a professional MC is really important, because these things happen, you know, more often than not. The celebrity speaker is late, somebody ends early, or something else happens where there's a change in the schedule. And, you know, you have three. I've had a situation where I've been emceeing a conference and there's 3 breakouts after the general session, and somebody misses a flight and there's only 2 presenters, but the rooms don't hold enough to go to 2. You have to have 3 speeches. So I've had to jump in and do like a 90-minute workshop, you know, on whatever topic I'm versed on, not necessarily what the person who was supposed to do was doing. But that's why having a professional MC, they can fill in and do whatever you need to do for your program. Whereas if it's just a board member, they may or may not have that skill to riff for a half hour or to become your breakout speaker with 20 minutes notice.
Melyssa, is that something you guys have explored, using a professional MC?
We have not in the past, but we've started talking about internally for some of our programming that is a lot smaller than our Solar Power International show, where we really want to tell a story in the state or the region. Having someone kind of tie the different messages and the networking and the connection through each session and each event, I think would really help tie the event together and make it a little more professional and elevate it a little bit more.
Yeah, I mean, and I'll chime in as well. I mean, I think it definitely lends something to a lot of different sized events. It doesn't just have to be the big ones. I mean, I've certainly appreciated from the production side of, you know, like you say, having that person that can vamp if they need to, you know, a little tap dance, you know, like, why don't we just start pulling people up from the audience, play a game, do something to fill that space. But then also just frequently, you know, in a lot of different associations, they'll go to the board members or something like that. Some of them are good, and some of them are not so good. And it's tough because, you know, being someone who's always kind of in the back of the room, you know, you can tell when you start to lose people and they start to get up and walk out, and it's like you feel bad for the person. Yeah.
The Master of Ceremonies, and I believe your keynoters, the Master of Ceremony and the keynoters really set the tone for the whole conference. And if your general session is 9 to 10:30, that hour and a half really sets the tone for the whole day. And if you use, you know, if you have general sessions in the morning and the afternoon, having that same person who comes in and resets the energy after lunch and who has, you know, sort of content that they can add to the event, whether it's what I do about, you know, the conference catalyst, or whether it's someone who's a comedian or an impressionist or whatever, somebody who can do something that runs a thread through the entire event. It takes away some of that risk that this year's board chair, you know, really probably shouldn't be on stage, but the board chairs are always on stage, so we just have to go with it.
I will say I've seen it go the other way too, where there was a group that I worked multiple years on, and they used the same MC, you know, every year, and he was really funny the first year, kind of funny the next year, really starting to get pretty old the year after that. So,
was he using the same jokes?
Basically, I mean, it was similar. It was like it was the same shtick. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you what, I usually go back when people use me. They'll have me back a second year, maybe a third. But there comes a point where it's not the Thom show either, because I'm not part of that industry. In fact, my biggest client the last 2 years came to me and said, "We love you and we want you back. Don't be offended that we're not using you in 2017, because in 18 or 19." We have already committed, we're having you. We just need to shake it up. We want to have somebody, you know, they wanted to have a woman MC, they wanted to have maybe a comedian, and I'm like, not a problem. I mean, I totally understand. You know, it's bad when you go 2 years because you start to feel like you're part of the family, and then you realize you're not, but it's their show, it's not the MC hour.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to shift focus a little bit, and it's something you guys touched on briefly when we were talking about choosing the speakers, you know, using that as a potentially a big name to put, you know, butts in seats, basically. But, you know, it sounded like that wasn't necessarily your first choice. But I think there are a lot of marketing opportunities and potential cross-marketing opportunities, cross-promotional opportunities. You know, how can event people kind of leverage these types of things, you know, to kind of help look for cross-promotional opportunities and use those keynote speakers as an advantage, as a marketing opportunity? Thom?
Well, I think one of the things is when you're looking to hire a speaker, whether they're famous or not, it doesn't matter. When you're looking to hire somebody, you have to remember they're not just a commodity vendor that you're checking a box. Hey, we filled the keynote. You're looking for a partner who wants to be committed to making your event successful. And so they should be willing to do videos in advance. I do that a lot for clients who ask, where we'll film a video where I'm like, hey, I'm going to be your opening keynote. We're going to have so much fun. Here's what we're going to talk about. Here's why you don't want to miss that session. You want people who are willing to do that, who will write articles for your newsletter that tie into what they're going to talk about, who maybe will do some sort of like a video chat maybe beforehand where they're talking about this, or afterwards. And a lot of speakers will do it if you just ask. I worked with one group, and they had a celebrity best-selling author, and they didn't read the contract. And his contract said that he would leave a venue 15 minutes after saying, "Thank you very much." That was actually the words that were in the contract. And they had planned a 2-hour reception and book signing with him that they had promoted for 6 months. And he wasn't willing to stay. They finally talked him into staying for like 45 minutes, and they just rushed everybody who wanted the book signed through the thing. And I had the opportunity to talk to him, and you know, he's like, it was in my contract. I didn't have to give them this. But if they had negotiated it up front, you know, he was getting paid a lot of money. I bet he would have stayed 2 hours for that fee, because it was a lot.
Melyssa, does that impact your world at all, trying to find additional marketing opportunities?
So I'm going to answer that question through a different lens and talk about how we capitalize on the hundreds of speakers that we utilize throughout our annual trade show and our smaller events. And how we do that is we have created a speaker toolkit that we send to all of our speakers in advance that has pre-written tweets and Facebook posts and LinkedIn posts and different photos and other branding that they can just copy and paste and spread the message to their networks that, hey, I'm speaking, come support me. We've also tried to implement what we call sizzler videos, where we have our speakers submit videos of what they plan to talk about at the conference and market it through that way, so that we can garner a little bit more enthusiasm and engagement from the speakers that we don't necessarily pay, but that are experts in the industry.
And I think that's great, even as a paid speaker, when they provide me with, the social media pre-written links. I'm happy to. I'll tweet it all day long if that's what they want me to do.
Well, and you've touched on something that rolls right into an audience question, so it's perfect. And the question is regarding social media reach. Does social media reach of your speakers impact your decision on whether or not to hire them? And Thom, I guess the question would be towards you would be, is that something that you're seeing in the industry? But Melyssa specifically, does that impact who you're deciding is going to speak in one of your sessions? How much reach they've got?
I think it's an influencer. It's definitely not the main decision factor, but we've had speakers that are very active and engaged on social media, and we're happy to have them because we know that they'll promote our event, but it's not the deciding factor. We've had some issues too where they want more speaking time because they promote our event more, so we've had to deal with that piece and saying, well, no, just because you do, it doesn't always work that way.
Right. Do you go back and real quick before I come to you, Thom, I just want to ask Melyssa, do you go back and look at posts like either from attendees and kind of afterwards and go trying to get a vibe on how well they've done?
Yeah, we do. We also track all of our speaker ratings, so through surveys and stuff, so we can see how speakers have rated. But I think social media has become a bigger way to track that, and you definitely get stronger feedback through social media than a survey, I think, because you're in the moment when you're posting.
Yeah, and I don't think I've ever won or lost a deal because I'm more or less active. I'm probably something on social media, but I do know at events, especially if it's a group that's already active on Twitter or some other social media thing, I will get active while at the event, and because I'm staying longer, I'm not just speaking and leaving. If I'm doing the conference catalyst program or the MC, I'm there at least a full day, if not multiple. I will participate on the social media stuff, and I know that afterwards planners have said, wow, we really appreciate how active you were with our people. So I don't think I get events because of it, but I think they notice it when I do it.
Fair enough, fair enough. Here's kind of a fun one that we've got that is, what may be a sign that you shouldn't book a particular speaker? Are there any kind of red flags or warning signs that you've run across that, for someone, again, who's maybe just starting out, that they might go, oh, they might not quite recognize? Thom?
Well, I think this is more of a question for Melyssa, really, but I would say one thing I always try to ask people is, how many times has your speaker presented in the last 2 years? If the answer is 3, I don't know that that's somebody that you necessarily need to be hiring as your main speaker. Now, if it's your industry speaker who's doing a breakout, that's a different world. They have a full-time job. But I think speaking is a learned skill. You want to make sure it's somebody who is dedicated to learning that skill, and the more, it's a word-of-mouth business. So if you're good, you'll work 50 to 100 times a year, and I think that's the thing, is I think that's a fair question of every speaker is, can you provide me with the list of where you've spoken in the last 2 years? And when I get asked that, I love to send that.
Melyssa, any red flags?
Yeah, so we don't hire a lot of speakers. We may hire one keynote or so, but all of our speakers are industry experts. So we track through our abstract process and just other inquiries that we send out where they've spoken and how many times they've spoken, and even asked, hey, how were you rated at another conference that you spoke at if you have not spoken at our conference? And we keep a database of how they've rated at our conferences, so on a number scale and with comments. And then we've also been able to track other conferences through our submission process so that we can really vet those speakers, but also give a speaker a chance who may not have ever spoken at our event, because they may be a great speaker, just have never spoken at our events before. So we definitely ask those questions when we are inquiring about somebody to speak.
And a great thing to do if you use a lot of industry speakers, and I've been asked to do this with some clients, is put on a webinar in advance for those speakers on some basic speaking skills. And that's something a lot of my clients have said, can you provide that for our industry speakers? And the truth is very few log on. I don't know how many watch the replay, but if they have 40 industry speakers, maybe 10 of them will show up. But I think it's a valuable thing to offer your speakers who aren't professional speakers, so that they can just have a little tips and be a little more comfortable, and it makes them better. It's better for your audience.
I would agree with that. We do a first-time speaking webinar, and it doesn't always get a lot of traction live, but a lot of people will watch the recording later. And I don't know if we'll get to this later, but we have a pretty extensive speaker training program for our industry presenters because they're not professional speakers.
I admire that. I think that's great.
Yeah,
I'd love to hear more about that. I mean, I've heard of some events that are kind of really making that their hallmark, where they're going to their industry speakers and offering them full-on classes on how to become better speakers, and even then on site, like having like on-site hair salons and things like that, so that everybody can get a nice, look their best, feel their best, and be ready to go for the event itself. So yeah, what are you guys doing in the industry?
Man, I'd love to have a hair salon on site, but that's not realistic for us.
I've given 600 presentations. No one has ever offered to do my hair.
No. So for us, we have developed some materials and resources for our speakers, and I'm lucky to work with some great colleagues who really focus on adult education best practices. So we've compiled a lot of these resources into a speaker and a moderator guide that we will send out to our speakers as soon as they are accepted to speak. And that consists of a lot of different elements. It's a pretty extensive list, but we talk about how to engage the audience, some presentation best practices, logistical information, AV information, like how does it all work? They might have never had to be mic'd up before, and that helps on the AV side. We have them meet our techs in advance in our speaker ready room. All of our AV techs and our other speakers meet in there, and we do a presentation every day in the morning and the afternoon for all the speakers who are participating throughout our program, so that they're really comfortable with the technology and with speaking. We also do extensive speaker preparation calls. So about 2 to 3 months before our annual trade show and conference, we will start speaker preparation calls with every session in our program. And that we will do some trainings on how to deliver their messages and how to be confident on the stage, but we also have them collaborate with the other presenters on the panel so that they can build some like charisma with each other, and they understand what they all will present on. And the moderator can also be on that call and help weave in some themes. So 2 to 3 calls we like to have. That's a success for us when we can have 2 to 3 calls with each of the sessions before the conference, so that they all get along well together and there's already some chemistry built before they get on stage.
I think that's phenomenal. I would love to see more industries and associations and conferences do that kind of thing. I mean, because again, the number of times that I've been in the back of the room and just seen some awful presentations from people who were incredibly smart and knew the material backwards and forwards, but no matter what was going to come out of their mouth, half the audience was going to fall asleep. So it's
Brent, you bring up a really interesting point. Just because someone is smart doesn't mean they necessarily belong on stage.
Yeah. Very true.
So I think that's great, and the more that we can do in all of our various industries to help make that better. I mean, associations are struggling with how they stay relevant, in the internet age, because you join an association to meet people and get education, and you can do both of those online now. Mm-hmm. So it's finding a way to make a difference. And man, if I have to choose between 2 conferences and one of them is doing all that you guys are doing, I mean, that's going to make the difference for me, as far as education sessions go.
Another element that we've really focused on too is how to engage the audience. And so we've developed a list of different techniques that presenters and panels can implement, whether it's like a polling of the audience or really diving into creating a case study to present versus just PowerPoints. We don't really encourage like heavy PowerPoints because we want it to be more discussion based on stage. Certain presentations require a PowerPoint, but mostly if they're panels, we want them talking to each other in the audience and really getting that feedback versus a boring PowerPoint.
We had another question come in from the audience about what we were just talking about. So, Tom, you mentioned that there are some people that are smart that shouldn't be on stage. Are there anybody that are speakers who present on behalf of smart people that shouldn't be on stage? Does that make any sense?
Yeah, I mean that there are people who partner. I mean there are speakers who I know who have partnered with somebody who has written a book, or they're a PhD, they've done amazing research, but speaking isn't their thing, and it's not that they're not necessarily good at it, they just don't want to do it. That's the other thing, is I see a lot of speakers who do it who don't like it. It drains them. It's all that. Yes, there are people who will find people to partner with. There are companies that sponsor a lot of events, like in technology, who will go out and hire people who, maybe it's a tech company and they hire somebody who isn't necessarily, a tech engineer, but they educate them to the point where they can talk, smartly about it, and then they'll have them be the representative. So when the sponsorship comes with a speaking gig, they don't just send Bobby. They actually send somebody who is a skilled presenter. And then it's funny because companies that do that, they score higher in, everybody wants to go to their sessions because their speakers are better. So they've figured out that that's a way to do it.
It also sounds like it's another opportunity for either, not necessarily an MC, but more of a moderator, where you do the one-on-one conversation. So instead of that person getting up and speaking for an hour and a half, have someone who can sit down with them and guide the conversation, ask the questions, be that more kind of one-on-one news program style thing.
So I believe that that's actually better than having a keynote with Q&A. I actually think it's better to let the keynoter go for, if you've got an hour, well, let's call it an hour, let them go for 40 minutes and then have the Master of Ceremonies come back out and have a couple of highboy chairs and a couple of cups of coffee. And instead of waiting for people to come to the mics where you might get questions, you might not, sometimes it's crickets, you actually have that discussion. And you can still have audience questions, but when there's not one or they don't get very meaty, that the Master of Ceremonies can then, steer the rest of that conversation. I think that goes a lot better than just Q&A or a session with no Q&A.
Melissa, I'm seeing some nodding head there. Yeah. Is that something that you guys are doing with solar energy?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I mean, we like to do Q&As like that as well. Yeah, great advice. I don't have anything more to say. Yeah, great advice.
Fair enough. Well, we're starting to wind down here at the bottom of the hour. Just a reminder, everybody, if you do have questions for our guests, for Tom and Melyssa, please feel free to either use the Q&A section of GoToWebinar, or you can also hop on Twitter, use the hashtag #EventIcons, and send your question there. Otherwise, I'm just going to keep charging ahead, and I love the sound of my own voice, so I can just do this all day long. No, so we love your questions. Please do feel like you're part of the show, because we want you to be, and we want to make it as interactive as we possibly can. Okay. And this is always a tough one when you start getting into favorites, but I'd love to know if in the course of, Melyssa, the work that you guys have done, I know yours are more industry-based speakers, but do you have any favorite presenters that you've worked with? What made them good? What made them different?
So, not keynotes, because like I said, we haven't had a lot of keynotes, but I'll generally speak on what makes a great speaker and why we want them to return is that they're really engaged in making the event great. They are advocates for our event, and they will really help us do our jobs better and help train other speakers. They're willing to help create a better show and a better experience for the attendees, and they always get rated high as speakers because of that. And we use them as advocates for our events because they're very engaged and they're very willing to help.
And Tom, I know it's probably a tricky question for you to answer, being in the business, and we're often the most critical of the industry that we're in. I know I am when I come and take a look at an AV rig. But are there any speakers out there that you were just like, wow, this person is amazing, and why?
Well, I mean, there are so many, and if I go too deep without an explanation, I'm going to make enemies of my friends, right?
Exactly.
So, I definitely think that you want to find speakers, especially when you're dealing with the non-celebrities. You want to find people who are committed to the meetings business. And so, like, I have my CSP, which is National Speakers Association's designation. It's a certified speaking professional. And some people will tell you, oh, that doesn't matter. And you know what? I don't know that it matters. I don't know that I've gotten hired from it. But what it means to me is that I'm dedicated to the speaking and the meetings business, because you have to have longevity of being active and making money and serving clients in order to get this. It's not like you can just go take a test and say, I know what a microphone is. You have to be able to actually show that you've been a working speaker for 5 to 10 years. And so, I say take a look at people who have their CSP. I think, does that mean everybody's great? Of course not. But it certainly is a thing to say they're dedicated to the business. And then I'll give you 3 names of non-famous speakers, and I'll preface it that they're friends of mine. They're in my mastermind group. I have this group of 4 of us. We rent a house somewhere in the country twice a year, and we sit down and we help each other. But our businesses are also vastly different, and our topics are different. One of them is a lady named Jessica Pettit, and she was the top-ranked college speaker for many years. She has now gone to the corporate and association world. She's releasing a new book called Good Enough Now, and she deals with all sorts of tough issues around inclusion and diversity and all other stuff, and people feeling like, oh, we can't get it all done, we don't have the right stuff. Her answer is, you know what, you're good enough now. Come on and let's just get stuff done. And I've seen her captivate audiences to the point that the line of people wanting to hug her is 40 people deep. The next person is a guy named Jerry O'Brien. He has a company called What Big Brands Know. He used to be the brand manager for both Quiznos and Coors Light and some other companies, and he now teaches small businesses, restaurants, and franchises how to market their business without having to spend a lot of money. And same thing. He speaks at a conference, and people want to just hire him to be their CMO, and they can't do that because he speaks at 60 conferences a year. But he's amazing. And then the final person is a woman named Eliz Green. She has an interesting background. She's a heart attack survivor while she was pregnant with twins, and she started speaking about heart health and women's issues, but now she has a program called The Problem with Busy, and it is blowing up association audiences and the fact that we're all dealing with, do we have enough time in the day? And she's done some really interesting research that shows, that we're hiding behind busy, and that it's not, time management isn't what we need. We need to just get beyond that, the obsession we have with being busy. So those 3 will wow an audience. I mean, if you hired any one of them, they would, people be lining up for a half hour to talk to them. And yet they're not necessarily household names, and they're not $40,000 speakers. So they're affordable, and they're awesome. And they're my friends.
That's great, and that's that topic of busy is something that I'm hearing a lot more and more often come up as because that's kind of our pat answer, right? When how are things doing? Oh, good, busy, good, great, busy, and yeah, the resistance to that, I think, is well deserved. That we need to be able to not have that be our stock answer. So I would be very interested. All of those sound really fascinating. So thanks for sharing that, Thom.
Well, you asked me to pick some, and being as active as I am with the National Speakers Association, I could have given you 100 names, but I'm safe if I pick my mastermind group, because my other friends will realize that I have a special kinship, since those people know way more about me than they should.
All right. Okay, so as we start to wind down, we do have kind of our stock questions that we like to ask at the end of the show, much like we do at the beginning. And this is one that we kind of teased earlier, and we'll start with you, Thom, and that would be, if you could pick one thing, what would be your one tip that you have for event planners? And I can say you can kind of do 2. So if you want to do specific to speakers, 1, but then general tip, that would also be great.
So the first tip would be, if you want to source great speakers who are going to be a good match, ask your former speakers. At the end of a conference, ask your speaker, who do you know in the industry? Because if they're committed to the business, they're crossing paths with a lot of speakers. Ask them, what other speakers do you think would be a good fit for my audience? Now, not everybody has referral DNA inside their heart. Not everybody can do this, but I think most speakers will have a list of 3 or 4 people who, now that they know your audience and they know what your conference is about, they can tell you some ideas that will blow your mind. And I love to tell my former clients which speakers I think would be good for them. And when they pick one of the ones I refer, they're always like, God, it was the perfect fit, because I know the audience and I know the speaker. So I think your speakers are your best referral sources for future speakers. So that would be my first tip. And the second thing I said earlier, and that is look for speakers who are willing to be a partner with you before, during, and after. And that means they'll do those videos, maybe they'll do a webinar later, and that they don't have to necessarily always nickel and dime you. You know, want you to do a half-hour webinar 3 months later as a follow-up. Maybe they'll throw it in or do it for a nominal fee to make it affordable for you, because they're your partner to make it a long-term deal. It's not just cha-ching, cha-ching, cha-ching.
And I mean, is there another general tip that might not necessarily be, because you know, one of the advantages is that you get to then be part of a lot of different events, so you see the good, the bad, and the ugly. Is there kind of a general tip that you have for event planners?
Longer breaks, longer breaks, longer breaks. I did an event recently, and they had like 15-minute breaks for 500 people, and nobody could get to the next room because people have to pee and they want to talk. So I'm seeing a good trend of 30 to 45-minute breaks between the education, and I believe in that. I think that makes for a better conference.
Yeah, white space is huge, and they're even finding ways to brand that as a sponsorship opportunity. This lack of anything is brought to you by, you know, and I think it's brilliant. It just goes to show that anything can be a sponsorship opportunity. Okay, Melyssa, do you have a tip for event planners? It can be either related to speaking or it can be just a general tip.
I do, and I love Tom's advice. That's great. I would echo that. The other general advice I would say is be creative. Just because you've done something the same way in the past doesn't mean you have to again. So break out of that habit, even if it just means trying a new session format for one session. See how it goes, and if it doesn't work out, oh well, like at least you tried it, and try something different the next time. We've explored a lot of different methods and formats for not only content delivery, but networking as well. And like you said, that dead space, we've built in a lot of different breaks in between our sessions and created educational lounges to continue the conversation. So there's so many different ways to be creative and provide the experience that you want your speakers and your attendees to have.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and yeah, I wish more organizations were willing to just try things out, and like you say, if it doesn't have to be your main stage, it can be one of the breakout sessions.
Right.
My favorite thing a client did is they called me, a repeat client, and I've only done breakouts for them. I've never done main stage, but they called and said, "Are you willing to play? We have an idea. Are you willing to play with us?" And I just loved that. And what it is they wanted part one of a workshop at their 2017 event, and they wanted part two in 18, and they were going to pick a couple of speakers and bring them back for breakouts and have part one, part two. And you know, will I have the same audience? I don't know. I've already done part one, but next year, I mean, I just think it was a cool idea, and it was something they were willing to try. I mean, they do something like 60 breakouts, so you know, picking 3 or 4 speakers to do that, you know, it was great for me because I booked 2 gigs at once.
And you could do like a 101 and then a 201. So I mean, you know, where you've got an intro session and then a deep dive the next year.
And the deep dive will stand alone in case you get new people, but it's still, the idea is that. And then I volunteered in June, in the middle of the year, I'm going to do a webinar that will be sort of bridge the two.
Okay, final question. You guys are in. Unless something comes in from the audience, we're getting down there, the top of the hour. So we always ask if you have any kind of new or cool resources that you'd like to share. Now, I want to be clear. It doesn't have to be industry related. It can be a gadget on your desk. It could be just, but what is, you know, what's lighting your fire these days? You know, what are you really enjoying? It could be a website, an app, gadget, book, blog, and we'll start with you, Thom.
You know, that's not new. It's been a big deal for a couple of years, but I think listen to more podcasts. I think, you know, if you want to expand your horizons, you know, you've got all this stuff in the iTunes store or on Stitcher if you're on a different platform where you can download really interesting people who are doing I mean, there's sports podcasts, there's magic podcasts, there's entrepreneurial podcasts, there's industry for meeting planner podcasts. I just think that you should be listening to a variety of podcasts. I do it on my run. You know, 4 times a week, you know, instead of music, I listen to a podcast, and so my 3 to 5 mile run becomes a little university, and I think that it's free and it's right there, and you'll be glad you did.
You're singing my song, Singer. It's absolutely one of my the things as soon as I discovered podcast, it just opened up my world so much to not only this industry but also just technology and economics, and it's just, yeah, I can't imagine mowing the lawn without them. Melyssa, what about you? What have you got that's rocking your world these days?
So some of the specific resources that I use regularly is Velvet Chainsaw blog, and then BizBash, which I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with, just for some creative ideas. But another one of the things that I love to do is just look at what other industries are doing. I get to attend a lot of non-industry events, so that's how I get creative. That's how I kind of break the mold. So just going to like a CES or an NAB show is fun, but even other smaller associations, I'll pop in and just see what other people are doing, so I get a better breadth of the industry. And PCMA and ASAE are all great, but I just love getting out there and seeing what other people are doing for their events.
Very nice, very nice. Good advice. I agree completely. I think there might be a closet industry that I keep wanting to start and never having the time of, kind of like secret shoppers, only it's like secret attendees, where you could just like go to other people's completely different industry, completely, and you could share, like, I'll come to yours, you come to mine, and then you come in and you live it as an attendee. Like, I think that would be an amazing experience too.
I'll get in on that business with you.
Nice. All right, let's make it happen.
Yeah.
All right,
I'll go to more.
We've already got 3. All right, let's make it happen. All right, well, that seems to wrap things up for this episode of Event Icons. I do want to thank you guys for joining me. Melyssa, where can people find out more about you, what you're up to, and we'll find out more about the Solar Trade Show?
Kinds of things. I'm on LinkedIn and all the social media, but I'm also, you can check out our event website, which is Solar Energy Trade Shows. But I would encourage you to go to Solar Power International. That's our platform for everything, and events.solar for all the stuff that we are working on.
And Thom, what about you? Where can people find out more about what you're up to?
It's all Thom Singer, ThomSinger. It's ThomSinger.com. On Twitter, I'm Thom Singer. On Instagram, I'm Thom Singer. On Facebook, I'm Thom Singer. I have a professional speakers page. I have my podcast, Cool Things Entrepreneurs Do. And I love to interview people from the meetings business, because I think we have some great entrepreneurs in this industry. So if you listen to the podcast and you like it, and you think I should be a guest, just tell me.
And that's Thom Singer, THOM. Don't forget the H. Very
Actually,
important.
If you forget the H on the URL, I own Thom Singer, ThomSinger.com.
Smart man. Yeah, I have got the misspelled version of my name on Twitter, and it's just my face with a big cross through it, and said, okay, and if you actually are spelled this way, just let me know and you can have it.
Well, there's actually, I'm not that nice. There is a Thom Singer, Thom Singer in London, who wants to own ThomSinger.com, and for 10 years he's been asking for it. And I've said, you've got to come up with a big number that makes me part. Not willing to do that.
All right. Well, thank you guys again for joining us. That does it for another episode of Event Icons. We'll be closing it out here. I'm Brant Kruger, Event Technology Consulting, and I am at Brant Kruger on Twitter and just about everywhere else. So thanks, everybody, for joining us. We will see you next time.
Bye.
Thank you for joining us for another amazing episode of #Event Icons. To catch the transcription and all of the resources mentioned, head to www.helloendless.com/blog. This week's episode will be posted and available by next Tuesday. Also, let us know what you thought about this week's episode. Share your biggest takeaway and join the Twitter conversation sponsored by Alex Plaxon and Little Bird Told Media. Just tag your post with #Event Icons. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you again for joining us. We'll see you next Wednesday at 5 p.m. Eastern, right here on #Event Icons.